So, this is probably a bit controversial, but I'm going to attempt to do sort of like a progression guide for DPS builds, simply because they work most effectively when progressing and grinding. So you've got Warlords of New York, you've just beat this guy, Keener, you've got your watch, and then the game suddenly opens up. What do you do now? Some people like to figure it out and do it their own way. Other people like to get on the old YouTubes, which is perfectly fine, considering this is probably where you're seeing this video. However, once you're on YouTube and you start searching and doing a bit of research on builds, you will be hit with a plethora of pretty much maxed out DPS builds like I have here. Like, you've just got your Keener's watch. How are you expected to get this with these sorts of stats and numbers and etc.? It's just not feasible. It's not possible. So where do you start? I've not really seen any guides in which sort of show you where to start with a DPS build, which is hopefully what this video is going to serve as. Now again, this is possibly going to be quite controversial just because different people have different ideas of what's important. Sadly, I'm a little bit of a number cruncher and I believe I've found out what is mathematically the most effective way. So, here, and I cannot believe the amount of grinding this actually took me, but as far as I'm aware, this is possibly the most effective sort of brand setup. And there are going to be certain mishaps with this simply because my gear drop rolls are going to be slightly higher, as well as I do have a maxed out watch where if this guide is for you, you're potentially not. So I will be doing a bit more damage, I will have a bit more crit, I will have a bit more crit damage. My survivability will be ever so slightly more, etc, etc. But what we have here is quite simple. Now, for a starting weapon, I would honestly recommend the MK16 in some variant, simply because it hits hard, it has an okay-ish fire rate, and you're going to see a lot of people say FAMAS, FAMAS, FAMAS. Until you have the correct build to sort of bolster FAMAS, you're just going to be running out of ammo on repeat. For the mask, I am running chest guard. As you can see, I've got some skill things there. Chest, Providence defense. Gloves, Providence defense. For the backpack, more Providence defense. Again, we're not really focused on the attributes, it's more just trying to get as high a weapon damage as possible, as well as working off the brand set bonuses. Holster is Grupo, the knees are Fenris. So on this, we have from the 3-piece Providence, 15 headshot, 10 crit chance, 15 crit damage. Chest gives us another 10 crit chance. Grupo gives us another 15 crit damage, and Fenris will give us a 10% buff to ARs. I do have some crit rolls on those pieces. If you can get some crit rolls, I don't want to say prioritize. The priority would be weapon damage, but if you have one that's 10% weapon damage, but no crit rolls, and another that's 9% weapon damage, but there's a crit roll on it, take the one with 9%. If it's 5% and a crit roll, don't worry about it. If it's a little drop, it's fine. Like I said, I do have a maxed out watch, so some of my stats aren't going to be exactly the same as yours, and I can't really create a new account to basically show it off from scratch, so this is not going to be an entirely accurate scenario. But this is pretty much a makeshift build with non-god roll stuff. Most of it doesn't even make sense. It's completely rainbowed. I've got talents and rolls that have no effect on what it is I'm trying to do, but I'm on heroic. It's not the easiest time ever, but I am able to run around on heroic and get things done. Now, because obviously, I'm not sure if you remember, but on the chest I had a talent called Focus, so I was actually curious for this, that typically at some point you will get a named item just throughout your playthrough, just because they drop okay, commonly, decently, and typically a lot of people see named item or like perfect, whatever, and they get excited about it. So I have put on the artist tool, and I just sort of want to show that you can use a little bit of knowledge that you have gained through your own research or other people talking to you, etc., to play a little bit more with what you have available. So here on the chest I did have a focus as a talent. Artist tool is a rifle, which does work quite well with a scope, so utilizing that, because focus only affects scoped weapons 8 times or more, I am able to potentially play a little bit more at range for areas where I feel what I'm using isn't going to be particularly great and I need a little bit more comfortability. Again though, this is an elite patrol on heroic, and with the build that I am demonstrating, it's not great. I hit roughly 260,000 a shot, where my typical AR DPS build hits anywhere from 800,000 to 1.1 million, depending on stacks, headshots, etc. But I am able to, as long as I take my time and pick off the enemies that are easier first, so you deal with reds first, then purples, then elites. You're basically playing a numbers game. If you start with elites first, you're going to be wasting time and everything can creep up on you. If you take out the reds first, although there are going to be elites left which are harder, do hit harder, it will be an easier time for you to deal with because there will be less of them. It's, I don't want to say pretty simple, but you get the idea. Now, once you've done a little bit more grinding, you will then want to switch things up a bit. I'm just going to quickly clear my inventory just so it makes it easier for me to move a lot of things around. If you can, I would suggest keeping 3-piece provenance as well as your group O to holster, chest, backpack and gloves, because you will be swapping out the knees and mask. This is going to be a little bit more grindy because you are going to be looking for 2 rare drops. One of which is going to be Coyote's Mask, the other is going to be Fox's Prayer Knees. Now, I do have a lot of Fox's Prayer Knees, and I'm just going to pick one that isn't particularly not the greatest, so it's got a health roll on there which I'm not too caring about. And my Coyote's Mask that I've equipped sadly is God rolled, but I didn't really have any luck in farming a new one and getting one that isn't God rolled. But it shouldn't really make too much of a difference, and hopefully I can demonstrate that to you as soon as I can find something to demonstrate it on. So from the original, we have now lost the 10% increase in AR damage from the Fenris knees, and we're going to be using Fox's Prayer just because of the targets out of cover, or damage to targets out of cover roll on them, which are objectively the highest DPS knees in the game. Typically speaking, if you are running a DPS build, you are running Fox's Prayer knees. As well as Coyote's Mask is a very, very good crit orientated mask for not just you, also your team, and it just works pretty damn well. For both of these gear pieces, you will find Fox's Prayer typically in a knees drop area, however more commonly in an Overlord armaments. Knee pads are obviously quite self-explanatory. The Overlord armaments is the flaming sword within a shield icon. It's typically used for rifle builds, but just due to how powerful damage to targets out of cover actually is, it is very much worth taking that rifle damage on the roll just to help bolster your damage. And typically if you are running a DPS build, you will run an AR as well as a rifle, so it's not completely wasted. For Coyote's Mask, you will need to obviously go to a targeted loot area for your mask. However, from personal experience, nothing else really, I have found that Coyote, the boss at the end of Jefferson Trade Center, has a pretty good chance to drop Coyote's Mask. You might be wondering why. The boss's name is Coyote, the item is called Coyote's Mask. For me, it kind of makes sense. It's this boss's mask and you're just taking it off her cold dead corpse. I'm charming, I know. So yes, this is with Fox's Prayer and Coyote's Mask. It's going to, 1, help bolster our crit chance at range, and if we're in closer range, it's going to help bolster our crit damage. It is not going to be the largest increase in damage, but as you can see, we've gone from hitting about 260,000 to about 300,000 damage per shot. Obviously, one thing I haven't actually mentioned is the moment you get your watch and you're starting all of this out is how do you grind the initial set that I showed you. Again, it's all just going to be through targeted loot, RNG and luck. To set up for this video, it took me an entire day to get the pieces that I wanted to show that weren't too OP really. I didn't want to like come, oh yeah, check out this build that I'm designing around for new players and have everything absolutely max god rolled. I did have to sort of tone it down a bit. Obviously, you are going to die. You are not the most powerful going, and you're playing on heroic. So be prepared. I absolutely recommend you take a Reviver Hive. It is not going to be easy at all. I think that's one of the things that a lot of the late game or more veteran players of this game don't convey well enough to newer players. It's a looter shooter. It's grindy. It's going to take time. But yeah, this is the build I'm running. You might notice as well I have 0 mods in any of my gear. So again, my Cody's mask is maxed out. I do apologise for that. I didn't really have time to go and grind another one. I'm still running the same chest, holster, gloves, as well as backpack. Mostly useless. The only other change is obviously the knees for Fox's Prayer, which when they've got high weapon damage, the damage to targets out of cover always comes as a god roll. But yeah, that's not going to be the greatest going, but it clearly does handle heroic quite well. So next thing we're going to worry about is recalibration, and you want to do this when you have pieces that are remotely workable, and you want to put in stats that are going to help you, not bolster what you already have. So as we can see here with this chest, we've got crit damage on there. We're going to put some crit chance in, and that basically gives us essentially the rolls we want. We don't care about talents at the moment. They're not really there to help us for this point in it. They're just talents. All they do is they bolster what you already have. So if you don't have good rolls, the talents aren't going to give you anything. So we're just going to bolster what we already have. We need to sort of prioritize what will help us. Skill haste, regardless of how bad it might be on this build, is still going to help us to some extent on this build. Just helps us get our revive hive up quicker. If we're using a healing drone, when that goes down, it gets it up quicker. Again, on this we have explosive resistance, which can be of use, but we are doing literally 0 status, so we're going to get rid of the status. Kind of need to prioritize what it is we are working with. Now with the knees, I'm not going to touch these because I haven't figured out a plan for them yet. Here's one I prepared earlier, sort of situation, but I would be getting rid of the health and putting crit damage on there. But honestly, I've got about another 30 pairs already on me, so I'm literally just going to swap to a crit damage pair of Fox's Prayer. Again, these are god rolled. I do apologise, but I can only really work with what I have. Just going to put my other Fox's Prayers away, just because I haven't quite figured out what I want to do with them yet. And here, what we are now running is, obviously, we've had an increase in our crit chance and a good bolstering to our crit damage. We've not really changed much in ways of the build. We've just sort of increased what we already had. We're still grinding out. We're still going to be looking for new and improved pieces, potentially getting ones that, for example, the holster that had weapon damage, explosive resistance and status effects. If we could get one that had weapon damage and a crit roll on it, that would now be better, regardless of how much it drops, because we're now trying to bolster our DPS. We're at a point of where we're comfortable, we're able to get through things a little bit quicker and a little bit more smoothly. We just need to bolster what we have. Again, I really wouldn't worry too much about talents. For example, the highest DPS backpack talent is Vigilance. This is a 25% increase in your damage. If you get 2 pretty decent other pieces, they will give you more than 25%. Again, not running any mods, but yeah. With Vigilance, it's 25% when you don't take damage. 2 decent-ish pieces of gear will give you approximately the same, and it doesn't matter if you take damage or not. It is trying to find a way in which to give yourself a more stable DPS performance rather than working on your playability at the moment. As you can see, we've gone from doing what was initially 260,000 to about 320. We're now doing 360 to 400,000. So we've not gone up huge amounts just yet, but once we start pushing with the grind as well as the gear pieces that we have, we will now start to see some huge dramatic differences in damage. And one thing I do wish to convey, although this has taken me approximately 16 minutes to sort of address a lot of this, what you will actually find is when you're doing this for yourself the first time, this will take you a week, 2 weeks. If you're really into the game and you're able to like spend a bit of time and grind it out, a few days. But typically most of us have lives, jobs, wives, boyfriends, husbands, girlfriends, kids, etc. It will take time. Don't get disheartened. You will get there. So one thing I just need to address is the priorities of the roles. It's weapon damage, crit chance, crit damage, talents. I have seen people say you want to prioritize crit chance first. No, because if you've got Soddle damage, a crit on Soddle is still Soddle. You want to bolster your base weapon damage first, and then if you're able to push crit on top of that, it will work so much better. Simply because through actually testing it, I actually focused more on the crit chance, then on the crit damage, and then the weapon damage, and I found that my crits were only hitting as hard as what my base damage is now. So my crits were only hitting about 150,000, and my base damage was like 90,000. Working on my base damage first, which is at this point 125,000, but my crits are already up to 300,000. It works better, quite simply. While doing this as well, do not discredit other rolls and drops. You need to sort of have a look at what pieces are dropping. I'm aware I'm probably just completely deconstructing everything, but have a look at what is dropping, and when you have something that drops, you'll notice below it there'll be little arrows. That is how much you have put into your bench. If the arrow is below the roll, I would suggest keeping it and putting it into your bench. This just helps you out a lot further into the end game. And then once you start getting some high rolls on your gear, you can then start putting that on your pieces. Optimization is one thing as well. Personally, I would suggest absolutely don't touch it until you are at least SHD 1000, which probably does seem a long way off, I will not lie. You can touch it if you've got pieces that are pretty damn close to being perfect and you don't mind spending the points, but I really would think about what pieces you are going to do that to. Now, I've just put damage to targets out of cover on my weapon, and you should notice that there is not a huge increase in damage, but there is a pretty substantial increase in damage from just putting damage to targets out of cover on the weapon. Again, pieces aren't particularly perfect at this point, but throughout the entirety of this video, I've been on heroic. I've shown you less than perfect builds and rolls, and I'm hoping it just sort of conveys that the game doesn't have to be that daunting. A lot of people say that this game is actually quite confusing. Honestly, it is just simple numbers. You want weapon damage pretty high, at least for DPS builds. You want weapon damage high. You want to get as close to, I'm going to say 50%, simply because at the level that most people would find this guide interesting, 60% is going to be very, very, very difficult, probably almost unfeasible for you to get. So aim for like 50%. And then you want to work on your crit damage, and at this point I would say getting to at least 100 to 120 is more than worthwhile. I've run most of this without mods just to sort of compensate some of the higher roll gears that I will actually end up getting. I've just put a few mods on. You can also change up the way in which your weapon works. If you can, objectively you would want the plus 20 rounds in the magazine so that you now have 50 rounds, and you just little things as you go along will just increase your damage. I'm now hitting 400,000. It's not really too difficult. It's a little bit of brain power just to realise that your shots will actually do something. Headshots at a close range will do 500,000. It's pretty simple when you just sort of sit back and just take into account that it's not just attributes you're looking for, it's the gear pieces as well. So what we can do here is remove all of the mods, and we're gonna basically, I'm gonna put on some of my upper end gear that I already have prepared. Again, this is the gift. Don't worry too much about named, because perfect vigilance, there's 1 second difference. It's not an increase in damage, it's a decrease in time on the buff. So yeah, just to sort of show that, just with a little bit of progression and just realising that what you're doing. Again, you might notice that a few things have changed around, but I am keeping the 3-piece Providence and the 1 Gruppo restricted to holster, chest, gloves and backpack, because those pieces are kind of negotiable. It doesn't really matter where you put them, but the mask is coyotes and the knees will still be foxes. And from here you can just sort of work around varying different pieces, try different things, experiment, have fun with it. And on that, some of you may remember that the very first build I showed, which was my main DPS build, I was not using coyotes. I actually had a Providence defense mask, but the holster was an exotic called Dodge City. This is kind of what I mean by experiment with it. You will find different weird and wacky ways that suit your playstyle on how you wish to have your DPS build perform. So what I have here is basically everything's god rolled. I just don't have the mods thrown in, just to sort of, see, I'll quickly take that one out, just to sort of show that there potentially will be a little bit of leeway in the overall output of what you have. And then from here we can just have a little pop, and yeah, we're doing pretty decent damage. And when we get certain buffs activated as well, we're doing 800,000. So as you can see the progression, hopefully you can see the progression from the start, which was Cheska, Gruppo, Fenris, 3-piece Providence, swapping out the Cheska and the Fenris for Coyotes and Fox's Prayer, then bolstering what we've already got while grinding for new and improved pieces. And you will find that potentially as you go up you will get newer and shinier stuff as well. I've basically stuck with the same pieces throughout. You will have the capability to improve and change varying different aspects of your build, the roles, etc. as time goes on. Potentially as well focusing on a little bit of the talents. For DPS builds, for chest, you are looking for things potentially like Obliterate, maybe even Unbreakable, which is a bit more defensive. If you're not liking just how squishy it is, a little bit of Unbreakable as a chest talent does go a long way. For backpack, things like Composure and Vigilance, anything that sort of gives you a decent-ish damage buff. Bloodsucker is also potentially very good if you're playing in a solo environment, just because it means you get a 5% weapon damage increase per kill. So if you're not able to get those kills as consistently as potentially playing in a group, it's not really as worthwhile. Now, 2 of the best chest talents that you can actually get for DPS is one going to be Perfect Glass Cannon / Perfect Glass Cannon, depending on if you're able to get the named or not, or how you want to set it up. This will give you a huge increase in damage. It will also give you a huge increase in the amount of times that you die until you are used to it and learn to position and move around. I personally use it, I personally like it, but it's up to you as to whether or not you wish to use it. I would suggest get one and play around with it. You're going to die, you're going to get annoyed, just hold on in there and just try different things, moving around, different positions. A good one to do is sort of localized bounties in an area, because each area only really has like 2, 3, 4 max spawn locations where bounties will go. So you'll learn that particular area and that route pretty quickly, and you'll then sort of look at it and hopefully be sort of like, okay, I went this way last time and died pretty quick. If I just run round here and come out from the other side, will there be more options for cover, a different vantage point, something else that I could use to make my time easier? Although it seems like you're then compensating for glass cannon and potentially dying, what you're actually doing is, one, increasing your memory of the map, increasing your almost playability, your experience, as well as finding different ways in which you are able to perform in order to get the job done, so that when you start playing, or if you are playing with others, you have different ideas, you're able to bounce off each other. Although this isn't technically a tactical shooter, there are, in some aspects, a variety of tactics involved. Another chest talent is going to be called Focus. If you can, it seems contradictory, but you would want Perfect Focus, which comes with marksman rifle damage on it, but it has a huge damage buff of a 0.6 multiplier, which is essentially probably one of the largest multipliers at base value in the game. The catch to this is you have to have an 8x scope on your weapon. I personally don't like this because I don't like being scoped in all of the damn time. So, just to reiterate, basically from the beginning, because we're nearly done, focus weapon damage, then crit chance, then crit damage, then your talents. If you do happen to get a decent roll with what you're after and a pretty decent talent, but the weapon damage is quite low, it is definitely a viable option. For example, you get Obliterate, max crit chance, max crit damage, but the weapon damage is really low. Honestly, keep it. It is going to be worthwhile. You can always do something with it later on, or potentially just recalibrate it then and there. There are varying different ways in which you are able to bolster this. I'm just trying to do my best to convey that the game is not as daunting as a lot of people think. Hopefully this serves as a decent-ish build progression for people that have just got their watch and want a DPS build but don't really know where to start, and when they YouTube it, all they get hit with is the max the end DPS videos and builds, etc, etc. Anyway, hopefully this has helped out a lot of people. If you know someone that's possibly in need of this video, please do share it around. Thank you very much. Have fun, good luck, and don't die. It's bad for the health.